Greg Winters, author of the series There Be Dragons. Book 1, Lemuria, Scorched Earth, is on Amazon. This is my second reading. Monday morning, 24th of July. Sinuses are blocked up, I'm groggy. That's probably the worst time for me to try and do a reading. Hey dog. But it is what it is. Last time I read my preface and the prophecy, which was a young elven girl reading about 3 humans that would come and save the elder races. And now for the prologue. Now the prologue, my children read my books. I think they're the only ones. And they said, Dad, your prologue is boring. It's all end of the world stuff. And it's like we hear it every day, climate chaos. But, it's got to be here. It kind of creates the setting. So here we go. I'll try and read it quickly. Oh, another thing is I'm doing this not to create an audiobook because I'm not good enough for that. And not to create a following because I'm not good enough for that either. But if I choose a book, I want to know who the author is, and I want to know that he's written a few books, and I'm neither, so I wouldn't buy me. Unless I really, had a good sample, more than just, the little blurb at the back of the book. I want to actually read a few pages to see what I'd be getting myself into. So maybe after some of this, you would be interested in my books. Prologue. No, that's my mouse. By early 2029, our world as we know it has been thrown into chaos. A nuclear Third World War has all but obliterated civilized society. Economies the world over have crashed, and the resultant food and water shortages have caused even the gentlest of people to become desperate vagrants. Indeed, a biblical confluence of events was unfolding. If wars and famine weren't enough, a planetary X-system, aka Nibiru, had entered our solar system and was now visible in our skies. These planetary bodies and accompanying asteroids were causing havoc with Earth's weather patterns and currents. Massive earthquakes, volcanoes, and the resultant tsunamis, 100 feet high or more, were now commonplace, and most of the world's main coastal cities were by now destroyed or rendered uninhabitable. To make matters worse, a never-ending barrage of asteroids, ranging from the size of a car to the size of a football field, constantly rained down on Earth, exacerbating the already deadly cataclysms. Each successive disaster seemed ever more powerful and more deadly than the one that preceded it. Our world was dying, and day-to-day survival was becoming more difficult. Non-perishable food stocks and fresh water were almost depleted. What little hope remained for the Earth's survivors seemed to be diminishing with each passing day. But then, just when all hope seemed lost, an alien race appeared. These tall white humanoids referred to themselves as Atlanteans or Nordics, and they brought with them technological advances far superior to our own. They agreed with our leaders to come to our aid in return for our complete compliance, obedience, and ultimate subjugation. After all, was this not a small price to pay for the survival, safety, and security of the remaining human race? Frank's children, Jacob, Matthew, and Isabel McGregor, were not exactly the obeying and complying type, however. Somewhat amazed at the fact that they're all still alive and somehow surviving relatively comfortably in a small seaside town on the southern coast of Africa, they were intent on getting on with life as best they could under the circumstances, and without having to be interfered with by any entity, alien or human. These circumstances sometimes involved dodging asteroids or fleeing to higher ground. Nonetheless, they were excellent survivors, well, obviously, and they were managing just fine without having to concern themselves with the New World Alliance proclamation and decrees. The NWA consisted of a complex and often clandestine hierarchy. There were the human enforcers, who were mostly ex-police and military personnel, mindless fascist sheep or brown shirts with some of the more colourful descriptions used for this bottom tier of the NWA pyramid. Then there were the elites, high-ranking government leaders and corporate types, who were usually members of royal families or elite members of secret clandestine societies, such as the Rosicrucians, the Illuminati, and the Bilderberg Group. Yet even this human cabal was subservient to the Nordics. Of course, they had their own leadership structure, but the exact identity of the higher-ranked aliens remained a mystery to most mere mortals. Frank, however, despite all the chaos, was positively thriving. As a middle-aged eccentric recluse and a devout conspiracy theorist, he had been planning for the apocalypse for decades already. Now that, to everyone's surprise, not least of all him, because he was almost never correct in his predictions, the world seemed determined to end, he found that for once he had landed up in a situation he actually prepared quite well for. As a remarkably skilled inventor and engineer, he had gone ahead and built a large AWCC, all-weather conditioned craft, and several survival skins, well-insulated suits. He also had a whole storeroom filled with freeze-dried food as well as an abundance of stored water. Frank had in fact prepared himself for any and every end-of-the-world contingency, except for his single-minded willful children, that is. Frank had hoped that the four of them would sail off somewhere in his AWCC when life on the southeastern coast became too unbearable. He had no idea where, however, possibly some remote island sanctuary off to the east, except that with all the oceans now heaving and shaking, islands were developing the nasty habits of disappearing and reappearing at will these days, with or without the influence of an enormous erupting volcano. As bleak as his options were, he was nevertheless determined to sail away to some place as far as possible from the scary NWA. Frank was an outright anarchist at the best of times, so he wasn't about to listen to any kind of alien governance, no matter how well-intentioned they seemed. In any case, he believed in Jesus, and as far as he could remember, he was instructed to come out of Babylon and to kneel to no one except God. And this suited him just fine. Obviously, he knew that they could never be safe, especially on an island, which by virtue of the inconvenient fact that they were mostly low-lying coral atolls or protruding chunks of volcanic rock, were increasingly likely to be inundated by some giant tsunami or volcanic eruption, as alluded to already. Be that as it may, it had taken a lot of blood, sweat and tears to build this craft, and he was damned if he was simply going to let it stand high and dry, gathering dust, so to speak. Unfortunately, as is so often the case in this life, the best plans of mice and men often go awry, and so it was that Bella went missing. Ever the compassionate type, she had rushed off one night in search of a friend in need and had never been seen again. When he and his sons had tried to track her down, they were told by witnesses that the Brown Shirts had descended in the town and helicopters rounded up a group of survivors and promptly flown off with them. This meant that Bella and her friend had very likely been captured and taken to a nearby detention centre. Thereafter, they would probably have been flown to an NWA-controlled city somewhere far to the north, possibly to North Africa or the Middle East, right smack bang in the epicenter of New WA control. From there, they would likely be re-educated or reprogrammed to become NWA slaves. The news had all but crushed Frank and his sons. In a fit of despair, Matt had decided to join up with the clandestine and newly formed rebel alliance, so that, according to him, he could at least try to fight those who had kidnapped his sister. Jake had tried to persuade him to stay, reasoning that they would be better off if they stuck together, but Matt didn't think that sailing off into a raging sea offered them much of an alternative, and so he left to join his army the very next day. It was then left to Jake to help his dad in their mission to set out to sea. Only the objectives had changed. Now he and his dad would have to find a way to sail up north and to reunite with their families somehow. A desperately illogical plan, he knew, but it was all they could come up with.